Coming up next, the story of one of the greatest, most epic rock songs in history with so many subplots, it's a shock that it hasn't been made into a moving biopic or, you just can't make this stuff up. The song came from the writings of a 12th century poet. And then hundreds of years later, the ancient story fell into the lap of a legendary singer-guitarist who happened to be in the exact same situation as the man in this tragic story. This rock legend was in love with his best friend's wife. That's not anything, though. The song became shrouded in a cocktail of vices, from killing to adultery to drugs and stealing. When I say stealing, the song was stolen from an iconic singer that I have on the show to explain her side of the story. The Angled Web, one of the greatest rock songs ever, is finally revealed in all of its truth and drama, coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies. Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember those pop-up books, where you could interact with the pages through pulling the flaps and all that kind of stuff, you'll dig this channel of pure musical nostalgia. Make sure that you subscribe below right now by clicking the big red button. Click the bell so you always know when our stuff's coming out. I've been so fortunate to have had the opportunity to interview hundreds of musicians. And when I ask them what inspired their biggest hit, many of them respond that they don't know where the song came from. Just seems to come out of nowhere. And in the case of Layla by Derek and the Dominoes, a classic of all classics, this song was inspired by something very tangible. It was inspired by the ancient Persian parable titled Layla and Majnun, which means madman. The parable is also referred to as Layla's mad lover. Even before Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, there was Layla and Majnun, a romantic tragedy written as a poem by Nizami Ganjavi about a princess named Layla who was married to a man she did not love. This book was an adaptation of an ancient Arab tale, the story of Layla and Majnun. Although it was classic literature in parts of the Middle East, the book was not well known in the Western world. It was given to Clapton by his friend Ian Stewart Dallas after Clapton confided in his friend and told him about his intense obsession with a married woman. Dallas felt Clapton's plight sounded similar to the storyline of Layla and Majnun. Thinking that it could be cathartic, he gave his friend a copy of this book. And he was right. Clapton could not believe how closely the story of Layla mirrored his predicament. In the book, Layla and Hayes fell deeply in love with each other when they were young. But when they became of age, Layla's father forbid her to be with Hayes, and she was forced to marry a noble, even though she only wanted to be with Hayes. In Clapton's case, the situation, it may have been even more complicated because the woman that he had to have, she was not only married, she was married to his best friend. Object of Clapton's desire, of course, famously known by the world over, Pattie Boyd Harrison, the wife of none other than George Harrison. Yeah, Guitar George of the Beatles. Clapton and Boyd were having a torrid affair, but Boyd refused to leave George Harrison, and just like Layla and Majnun, it drove Clapton insane. He started to write a song about this infatuation. Now, instead of referring to his secret lover as Pattie, Clapton chose Layla, of course, to protect her and perhaps to save Harrison some embarrassment. But Clapton was smitten. He likely didn't care about anything other than being with Pattie. Layla became his pet name for her. In the song's chorus, Clapton, he poured out his heart for his Layla. Layla, you got me on my knees. Layla, I'm begging, darling, please. Clapton's frustration for his unrequited love for Boyd becomes even more desperate in verse 3. So make the best of the situation before I finally go insane. Please don't say we'll never find a way. Now, in 1966, George Harrison and Pattie Boyd were wed. The couple actually met while they were on the set of The Hard Day's Night, while Pattie was modeling. Shortly after, the guitar greats Harrison and Clapton became chums when Clapton made an uncredited contribution to the recording of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, of course from the White Album. While Clapton transitioned from Cream and then Blind Faith, he just fell madly for Pattie. Clapton relentlessly tried to convince Boyd to leave Harrison and be with him, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. One afternoon when Clapton and Boyd were together, he took her to an apartment in South Kensington. Now, when they arrived, Clapton told Boyd that he wanted to play a song for her that he had recently written and recorded. So, of course, he proceeded to play a tape of the original version of Layla, presented as a ballad. Boyd would later describe the recording as the most powerful, moving song that she had ever heard. And she'd heard a lot of songs by that point, being married to George Harrison. Although she thought the song was amazing, passionate, and devastatingly dramatic, Boyd was not happy when Eric recorded the song and released it to the public. Actually, in an interview with The Guardian in 2008, Boyd said that when Clapton created Layla, she felt exposed, by his public declaration of love. She'd resisted his advances for years and didn't want to leave Harrison. Inevitably, the marriage between Boyd and Harrison, it got so bad she relented and moved in with Eric Clapton. Oddly enough, Harrison, he was never angry at Clapton for stealing his wife, so to speak. It's probably because he had been guilty of multiple affairs while they were married, including a fling with Ringo's wife, Maureen Starkey. Anyway, Boyd and Harrison, they officially divorced in 1977, and this cleared the path for Boyd to marry Clapton in 1979. Harrison actually attended Clapton's wedding to his ex, along with Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney. But in another twist of irony, Boyd and Clapton, they didn't make it either. They divorced in 1989. I guess Clapton could live without Boyd, the woman he couldn't stop thinking about after all. Now, as I mentioned, Layla, it originated as a ballad, until it was completely reimagined to record it for the one and only album by Eric Clapton's band Derek and the Dominoes at Criteria Studios in Miami. This was in the spring of 1971. The artist that was most responsible for the transformation of Layla was none other than Duane Allman. Allman conceived the unforgettable lead guitar riff that sets the tone for Layla's swelling brilliance. Duane's riff was a sped-up derivative of the melodic structure of Albert King's song As the Years Go Passing By.
As the years go passing by.
Like many of his generation, Duane Allman was a big admirer of Eric Clapton. And he was thrilled when he heard that Slowhand was going to be in the crowd to see him perform at an Allman Brothers concert that was taking place in Miami. Clapton, of course, in Miami, recording the Derek and the Dominoes album with producer Tom Dowd at that point. When Duane met Clapton after the show, he was really nervous and tongue-tied. But Clapton, he was also a fan of what he saw from Duane Allman. Clapton asked Duane to perform on the Derek and the Dominoes album. So Duane would fly back and forth between Miami and between Allman Brothers gigs. The two guitarists, they clicked immediately. Clapton gave Duane the nickname Skydog and tagged him as the musical brother I never had but wished I did. Clapton loved working with Duane so much, he asked him to join the Dominoes as a full-time member. But of course, Duane opted to stay loyal to his brother Greg and the rest of the Allman Brothers band. In addition to developing the famous guitar riff for Layla, Duane also invented the crying bird sound, during the song's breakdown with his electric guitar while Clapton played on an acoustic guitar. This sound was incorporated in the track as a tribute to the jazz great Charlie Parker, who's also, of course, known as Bird. Layla was almost finished when Clapton decided that it needed a big finish, an appropriate finish. Now, at that point, Dominoes drummer Jim Gordon offered an elegant piano section for the song's stirring coda. Now, what Gordon brought to the song was just breathtaking. It was beautiful. Once the song was released, the credit for that component became the subject of much controversy. Eric Clapton assembled Derek and the Dominoes by literally hijacking the ensemble playing for the husband and wife act Delaney and Bonnie and Friends in 1970. Clapton was essentially Derek, while the Dominoes consisted of Carl Radel on bass, Bobby Whitlock on keyboards, and there's Jim Gordon on drums. Jim Gordon was an incredibly talented musician that gradually lost his mind, and he wound up in prison. More on that in a second. He was something of a prodigy. I mean, his first professional gig was drumming for the Everly Brothers traveling band when he was only 17 years old. Revered Hal Blaine, he witnessed Gordon's potential greatness, and he recommended that he be part of the collection of elite musicians for hire in LA called the Wrecking Crew. Gordon quickly became one of the most sought-after studio musicians out there. He performed on many notable records. I mean, Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, along with records by Paul Revere and the Raiders, Gene Clark and the Byrds, and so many more. Jim also played drums along with other members of the Wrecking Crew on Mason Williams' number 2 instrumental hit, Classical Gas, in 1968. Also, Carly Simon's massive hit, You're So Vain. Carly's signature song, Gordon actually improvised each drum part. Gordon was so in demand as a studio player, he had to fly back to Los Angeles for Las Vegas nearly every day to perform on 2 or 3 recording sessions. And then he'd return to Sin City in time to play the evening show at Caesar's Palace. So during a tour with Joe Cocker, Gordon began to act erratically. He heard voices in his head and grew increasingly paranoid. As his condition worsened, Gordon had trouble sleeping, even relaxing. Gordon had schizophrenia, but he was misdiagnosed by his doctors, who treated him for alcohol abuse instead of helping him with the real culprit. It was during a time when the medical world didn't know much about the dangers of schizophrenia. People that suffered from schizophrenia were often misdiagnosed or just exiled to a mental institution back then. So while on tour with Joe Cocker, like I said, Gordon started having outbursts of violence that scared everybody around him. The most alarming outburst occurred with Rita Coolidge. So Rita and Jim were an item back then. Both were performers in Joe Cocker's band in the early 70s. At the end of this tour, Jim actually slugged Rita in a hallway inside the Warwick Hotel in New York City. Poor Rita had a black eye for the rest of the tour, and after that altercation, she wanted nothing to do with Gordon, of course. Sadly, Rita experienced another punch in the face from Gordon, this time metaphorically. The first time that she heard Layla on the radio, this was a year after their breakup. When she heard the piano section in Layla's coda, she was flabbergasted. This piano part in the song was something that she had composed. She was infuriated. Even with their falling out, she couldn't believe that Jim would betray her and blatantly plagiarize her music. I actually interviewed her, and she mentioned it.
So I lived upstairs, and there was a stairway that went down. Bobby Whitlock lived downstairs. So he was always up and down the stairs, and, without knocking sometimes, because we were good friends. And a bunch of other people lived down there because it was, the 70s. Everybody loved.
Oh, yeah.
So Bobby would hear me playing the piano sometimes, and he would just come up and say, what's going on? And at that time, Jim Gordon and I were dating, and he came over one day, and as he was coming up the stairs and down the sidewalk, he heard me playing this piano part, and he came in and sat down and said, that's really beautiful. And I said, do you want to write a song? And he said, yeah. So, I played that, the coda, and then we started writing this song, Time. And we were touring with Delaney and Bonnie a few weeks later in England. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that tour, we went in the studio with Eric, and Jim and I planned on pitching this song to Eric because we knew we were going to be doing Eric's album with him. Yeah. So we made a little demo with a cassette, and when we got into the studio a couple of months later, I sat down at the piano during a break between takes of songs and played the song for Eric, and he liked it and left the cassette on the piano and felt that nothing had happened with it. And then, of course, and immediately following that, they formed Derek and the Dominoes, and Jim Gordon, Carl Radel, and Bobby Whitlock, who were in Delaney and Bonnie's band, became the Dominoes. And I was at A&M one day having my picture made from following the release of my first record, and I hear this music come over the PA system in the studio, and I'm like, wait a minute. I recognize this music. I know this music. And they're like, yeah, you don't know it. It's a brand new Eric Clapton record. I said, it's my music. And they took pictures of the veins popping out in my neck. I was so upset. So I ran out of the studio and went to Tower Records and picked up the record to see if I had gotten any credit. And of course I didn't. And I started trying to get in touch with Eric through Robert Stigwood, and who was his manager at the time, and he was just a mogul and not a nice man. I mean, just not a nice person. And I got him finally on the phone, and I said, I'm one of the writers, that's my music. And he said, yeah, what are you gonna do about it? He said, you're a girl. You don't have the money to fight this, let it go.
Wow.
And that was it. And I went back to A&M, to my record company, and they said, this record company doesn't have the money to fight Robert Stigwood. His pockets were way deep. And so the only thing I can do is just tell my story.
Now, officially, Jim Gordon got the co-writing credit with Clapton on Layla. He got the royalties, and Rita, she got the shaft. One of those devastating stories of rock and roll. Jim Gordon's schizophrenia intensified to the point where it was more common for him to exhibit bizarre behavior. As he had done with Rita Coolidge, Gordon attacked his wife, and she left him. And Gordon's next relationship also ended because of this type of behavior. Of course, all of this affected his work. Word got out that he was a live wire, so people, they stopped hiring him. He went from one of the most used session players to a feared liability from there. After his mother told him that he needed serious help, Gordon checked himself into a psychiatric ward, but it didn't get rid of the voices. He entered an institution 14 times. He was able to get some new offers, including one to tour with Bob Dylan's band. But he in turn passed. He claimed that the voices told him not to go. Eventually, he would talk about how he heard voices in his head that told him that his mother was trying to take over his life. Late in the evening, Gordon stormed his mother's apartment and he attacked her with a hammer and then a butcher's knife. After killing his 71-year-old widowed mother, Jim got drunk at a bar and went back to his apartment. When police stormed his apartment the next morning, they found him face down on the floor sobbing. It wasn't until after he was arrested for murder that he was correctly diagnosed as schizophrenic. At Jim Gordon's trial, the court granted that he had acute schizophrenia. However, due to changes in California law at that point, his insanity plea was denied. Gordon was sentenced to 16 years to life and was eligible for parole in 1991, but he failed to show up for his review. In 2014, he once again declined to attend his parole hearing. In 2018, an LA deputy district attorney testified that Gordon was still psychologically incapacitated, and he was still a danger to society when he was not taking his medication. Actually, Jim Gordon died in 2023 while still servicing his sentence at the California Medical Facility, a psychiatric prison in Vacaville, California. Now, the first time that Layla was released by Derek and the Dominoes, it was actually a bust. The single stalled at number 51 on the Billboard Hot 100. It didn't fare much better worldwide, except in Poland and Japan. When Layla flopped, Eric Clapton went into a tailspin. He couldn't understand why a song that he put so much heart and soul into didn't connect with his audience. So Clapton faded off into a funk of drugs and depression. It wasn't just because Layla had stiffed in the early 70s. Clapton believed he had lost his artistic identity at that point. Clapton never considered Derek and the Dominoes a real band. He actually referred to them as a make-believe band. The Derek figure was Eric's ruse for trying to steal another man's wife. Even before the failure of Layla, though, there were signs that Derek and the Dominoes weren't going to survive. Gordon and Clapton, they had a big falling out that just couldn't be fixed. They actually hated each other for one. On one occasion, in a first-class cabin of a train, Clapton got so upset at Gordon, he threw Gordon's suitcase with all of his belongings out the window while the train was moving at full speed. Now, Derek and the Dominoes, they never officially broke up. After only one studio album and one really small club tour, the group just imploded. Each of the four members, they went their separate ways. Eric Clapton would face another emotional setback when his friend and collaborator Duane Allman passed away when he died in that tragic motorcycle accident in October of 1971. Some of you recall we talked about that terrible mark in music history in our Spotlight on Ramblin' Man by the Allman Brothers. But Clapton came back in a major way in 1974 with his brilliant 461 Ocean Boulevard album. And then his faith was further restored when there was ultimately justice in the world for Layla. Layla had a huge resurgence in 1972 when the single vaulted to number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 7 in the UK. There was actually a third wave of success in 82 with the song charting even higher in the UK Singles Survey at number 4. And then, of course, Clapton brought Layla back to its origin as a ballad when he performed a slow acoustic version for an MTV Unplugged concert in 92. Privately, Slowhand liked to change the tempo of Layla, listening for different forms of expression. He thought the song would flow perfectly as a shuffle, which led to the way he played it on MTV Unplugged. The Unplugged version was released as a single that climbed to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, with heavy airplay on a variety of formats, top 40, rock, adult contemporary, all those. The reinterpreted Layla also won a Grammy Award for Best Rock Song in 93. For the most part, the only version the classic rock stations play is the full 7-minute and 4-second version of the track. How could you not? It's hard to imagine now that it was ever edited into a 2-minute and 43-second version as a radio edit. But it was. I mean, the mesmerizing yet controversial piano coda heard in Layla, it's become a pop culture standard. So powerful, it can just stand on its own, like an emotional section of a rock opera. Of course, everybody remembers how it was used near the end of the Martin Scorsese mafia classic Goodfellas, when everything begins to unravel for the movie's characters. The luminous coda of Layla is placed in a dramatic 4-minute montage, one of the best in movie history. Genius merger of sight and sound by the great director, truly bringing out the artistic euphoria of Clapton's amazing score of Unrequited Obsession.
We were good fellas, wise guys.
It may be the most storied song in rock and roll history. Definitely of unrequited love. Pattie Boyd, she must have been something, like the song says. I think more songs were written about her than any muse in history. She was just a goddess walking on earth, if the music tells us anything.
I don't want to leave her now. You know I believe in her.
You look wonderful tonight.
Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Eric Clapton and Layla. What are your memories of the song? What do you think about him stealing his best friend's wife? About Layla as a song? It's just such a storied song. Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe below. We love to have you as part of our content, part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.